Hey everyone, James Azar here with CyberHub Engage. Mike and I just got back from RSA. We're tired, we're sleepless, but we were so happy to meet so many of you there and be able to exchange in conversation around cybersecurity. The episode you're about to listen to was recorded at RSA, and we're so proud to bring it to you guys today. We're so excited about a lot of the conversations we had at RSA. We look forward to getting your feedback. And without further ado, here's a quick message from our sponsors at RSA, and then right into this CISO Talk RSA Roadshow special. Until next week, guys, stay cyber safe. Do you know where all your keys are stored? Do you know how many certificates and keys you have? Are you managing keys in multiple environments? If you don't have a secure cryptographic foundation, chances are you're struggling to understand the status and security of your cryptographic keys. Unbound's key security and management experts can help. Our FIBS validated cryptographic key security and management platform allows you to maintain visibility of all your keys, whether on-prem or in the cloud, without compromising on your security. Know exactly where your keys are and how they're being used. Manage them all with a single pane of glass. Automate operations in your organizations while saving time and money and manpower on doing just that. With Unbound, your enterprise can achieve agility and efficiency, gain control, and reduce risk. Today, Unbound is offering CyberHub Engage listeners a free demo of their cryptographic key management technology. Just go to bit.ly-getunbound. Again, that's bit.ly-getunbound for a direct ability to book your free demo of their cryptographic key management technology, which will help you secure your organization. Again, that's bit.ly-getunbound. Hey everyone, I want to talk to you about Synac's crowdsourced security platform that delivers effective continuous penetration testing at scale. Synac uses the world's top security researchers and AI-enabled technology to find what scanners and regular testing do not. It's used by the US DoD, leading enterprise and high-growth mid-market companies that strive for a quicker turnaround and better security. To learn more about their crowdsourced security platform, go to synac.com. Again, that's Synac, SYNAC.com. That's synac.com for more information. Hey everyone, I want to tell you a little bit about our friends over at Synopsys. We had the great pleasure of partnering with them at RSA, but I want to tell you a little bit more about Codeside IDE. So DevOps, these guys like to work in their strict environment, whether it be Jenkins, Jira, or whatever they are. Well, Codeside IDE plugs into that environment and allows the DevOps to become DevSecOps by essentially launching tickets into your ticketing system, whichever ticketing system you use, right into their environment, meaning security is no longer on the back burner, it's on the front end of it with our DevSecOps team. So go to synopsys.com for more information and let them know that CyberHub Engage sent you over there. Go to synopsys.com and let them know James sent us to check out Codeside IDE. Hey everyone, welcome to the CyberHub Engage podcast. We are in beautiful San Francisco, away from Moscone Center, thankfully, also away from coronavirus. Thankfully, we're in the beautiful offices of Dropbox, and I'm with Justin Berman, the head of information security at Dropbox. Justin, thank you for hosting us here, man.
Super happy to have you.
We're in the Tupac room, so we could play a little bit of Tupac to kind of kick off this interview. A little bit of California love would be just appropriate. People forget that Tupac grew up across the bay in Oakland. If you're not from here, right? No one knows that.
Don't get your podcast banned or sued by
who?
The recording agent, the recording RIAA, right?
For the rights of Tupac?
Yeah.
Well, we're not going to play his song on here. And if we did, it'd be fair use. We're not using it to promote the podcast. We're not monetizing his song, right? We're just saying hey, we're in the Bay Area. And when you think of the Bay, you think of E40 and Tupac. Right? That's the two artists you think about. No one goes to the Bay and goes, wow, Bruce Springsteen.
Totally.
So it's awesome to finally catch up. I've got so many questions for you, ton of notes, from our conversation. And I'm going to start at the very end.
Okay.
The theme for RSA this year was the human element. Mm-hmm. You've got a very interesting outlook into the human piece of it. Sure. So why don't you share with us kind of your view of what the human element really does mean in cyber?
Okay. Thanks for the question. it's one of my passion points in security that I think one of the things that security organizations have failed to do is see themselves as an enabler for organizations. And the way I relate to the human element is that, in particular, we tend to make our problems everyone's problem rather than making everyone's problem our problem to solve. One way to look at that in particular, if you think about phishing, is that our standard way of solving the phishing problem has a lot to do with teaching people to recognize bad emails and then not click on them.
Right.
But that doesn't really square for me, because the whole way that knowledge workers do work in the modern era is to receive email, read it, click on it, act on it.
Open attachments, click on links.
For sure. So the idea that we're going to solve that by teaching people to be more afraid of email when in reality they have to use it to get their job done doesn't work for me. And when I think about how I want to solve it and how we work to solve it here at Dropbox, I think about solving the root causes. Phishing is all about convincing a user to do something, whether that's entering their password, whether that's downloading and clicking an or opening an attachment that has malware in it, or whether that's acting on some process in a way that they shouldn't. Tricking the finance team into sending money to somewhere in Eastern Europe as opposed to them following their standard processes. But how do you fix those things? It's not purely by making sure they get less emails and that they're scared of their email. It's actually by fixing the root causes. For the credential theft problem, you make sure that there's 2FA everywhere. For the malware problem, you make sure that you have strong endpoint detection, response, and protection tooling. And for the process problem, you just put cleaner, more efficient processes into place so no one has a reason to violate them. And I think the risk that we take by continuing to optimize for how do I teach people, or and I think this is a huge problem that I've seen called out a bunch, so I don't think I'm the first person to talk about this. How do I make users feel bad about making mistakes? That's a huge problem with the way the industry currently approaches this. We blame users, security teams get into a mindset of my users are a problem as opposed to being part of the I guess what I would call part of the solution. But I don't mean it in the way that I think a lot of security people do, which is we have to recruit the whole organization to solve the problem. I mean it more like the users are just trying to do their jobs. We ultimately are trying to optimize for the whole company and not just for is it secure enough. So the users are part of that solution rather than being part of that problem.
See, and I agree with that kind of. When you and I were talking, I said, listen, the human element to me is interesting because as a CISO, even in small companies, the one thing, you're always letting everyone know is in a small company, everyone wears the security hat and everyone wears the sales hat and everyone wears the marketing hat and everyone wears the product hat. And in big organizations, when you go to enterprise and you're scaling, to organizations this size and even larger, it's almost like security gets detached from the culture of the business. And a lot of times they sit in their cave. And none of that was more evident than when I was looking at the City of Atlanta breach. So the City of Atlanta breach was very interesting because the first time I went into the city post-breach, I was being escorted to the InfoSec team. And you know where they sat?
Where?
In the darkest part of the basement at the very end of with brown walls leading their way in. And it's a city. We don't expect them. A lot of times we look at government, we don't expect the government to be very open to the aspect. But you think of the human element specifically there with the ransomware, and you start to look at how they approach their users and the communication with their users, and it was non-existent.
And why do you see that? Or what about what they were doing?
So I mean, I think the ultimate challenge with the human factor and the human element is, like you said, if you're constantly blaming your users, you're not getting any progress done because people are afraid of email's a natural part of business. I think the aspects that concern me the most, which is dealing with the social media factor, the factors where you as Justin or me as James, as CISOs, we have no control over. I can't tell you what messages you can and can't get in your LinkedIn inbox and what links and attachments come through LinkedIn. I have no control over your Instagram account or your Snapchat account or any of those. And that's where I think that's the next generation of security, where LinkedIn is a crucial part of business. And our adversaries in the cyberspace know that, and they use it. They've been using it for ages now. How do we deal with that? How do you deal with that? How do you deal with the social media element of security?
Interesting. So one way I think about the thing you just said is to relate it back to the cyber kill chain or other, like
right.
whether you use MITRE's ATT&CK or Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain, but like the way I relate it back is what is actually going on LinkedIn. So some of it is going to be similar kind of phishing, which is a delivery mechanism for some
right.
sort, the start of an attack. But I think a lot more of what goes on in social media is more at the exploration phase or
right.
more.
It's the reconnaissance phase.
For sure. So certainly one thing that I've done in the past is to seed social media with accounts with oh my God, I can't think of the...
Take your time, man. We are chilling out. You want a beer?
No, I appreciate it. With honeypot accounts.
Right. With
so that, what we, like you put some fake IT admins on LinkedIn and you look at who connects to them and because they're not real people. So, you get a smattering of people from the organization that connect with everyone.
Do you use a celebrity person? Do you use like a celebrity image?
Not you. No, that seems like the opposite of what I guess if I use a celebrity, wouldn't that be easier to recognize that it's a fake?
Yeah, but then you see who connects with the celebrity and you realize like those people are about to have fun with you. So you've got something good. Like put a picture of Tupac as your IT admin. See how many people actually pay attention to the picture.
That's interesting. I think that's a way to sort out more of the unsophisticated adversaries because they're going to look for it. They're not going to look at it sufficiently to understand what's going on.
Correct.
For sure.
You can reverse engineer them easier.
But yeah, I do find that when we think about the different phases, traditionally as security people, when we think about the phases we can actually affect, recon is not one of the phases we generally think about. And I think getting that early warning signal about phishing going to an account that is really a fake account for you is a great way for you to see the start of or part of a campaign that's going to affect a larger amount of your users. And that's cool.
See, that's one of those, that's a great point to look at it. I think the challenge becomes in social space today, especially because when you think of your most outward-facing employees, right? The employees where I spend most of my time with is not DevOps. It's not engineers. It's probably sales and marketing.
Sure.
And business development. They're the ones that are sending and receiving attachments. They're the ones that are sending and clicking on links. Typically DevOps or engineering. Those guys aren't really, their interaction is primarily within the organization or directly with one of their vendors.
Yeah, I also think about CX often here, like your customer service organization, because they are responsible for actually intentionally receiving content in a hard to validate form. You're going to put a lot of controls in that area. You're going to put a lot of process to try and make sure that if you have accounts that are sensitive in some way, or if you have data about people that's sensitive in their accounts, that you're going to make it very hard for someone to get access to an account they shouldn't have access to. But the social engineering against those customer service agents is a big deal. It
is, especially because a lot of times you see that as being their job's to help the customer.
Sure. And their natural inclination is to help the customer or the person that they think is the customer. And if it's a bad guy, they're trying to find a way to help that person, and they're doing their job to the best of their abilities.
Right, and that's why you can't shame them when there's a mistake, because that's their job.
Totally agree.
Right, like I think that's a challenge. I was having a conversation on the floor at RSA, and it was a security vendor. I won't say who, and they were telling me, well, what we do is we do phishing tests, and we try to get your users to understand attacker behavior. And I go, so if my user fails your testing, what happens to my user? And their response was fascinating for me. To go, well, first of all, we send an email down the chain, up the chain. So their supervisor and up to the reporting that they failed, that they go through a 30-minute training and then they're tested for it. We recommend that after 3 times you write someone up. I go, so what you're telling me is I need to go to HR and write someone up based on your recommendation because they failed a phishing test 3 times. I go, a highly invested phishing test
Sure. I think what you're reflecting is this blame users mentality as opposed to recognizing that we're not solving the problem for users. Why shouldn't security hold itself accountable for making sure that no phishing hits a user's inbox? Like if we're going to talk about metrics that we should measure, I think before a security team buys a product that blames users and you start writing up your users for failing a phishing test, you should be thinking, how can I minimize the pain they have? Even after you've exhausted those options, I don't think you're going to make friends or influence people inside the wider organization by blaming your users and telling them that they failed.
Well, it's like saying no to everything a user brings you.
I think I do agree. There's a mentality of no thing that reinforces. I'd almost also say, in what world are we not seeing ourselves as responsible for giving users more tools? If we're going to tell them that they have to solve a problem for us, then it's actually our job to equip them effectively. And that doesn't mean a 30-minute training video where you give someone a naive way to recognize, oh, this is a phishing attack because I've never received this from this particular email address before, or this has an attachment and I didn't expect to receive an attachment, when in reality we get so much email that how are you ever going to keep track of that? It's about giving them actual technology to stand in the way or to enable them or empower them to make decisions better. If you want to, I still would maintain that I think it's more the security team's job to solve than it is the user's job to solve. But if you think back to the CX example, I think there you can give the customer service agent a set of tools that enable them to see whether all different risk factor or where different risk factors are and whether they should follow up with extra questions, but to confirm a user's individual identity, as opposed to you just saying check these 3 things and then hammering people when those 3 things are fakeable.
So it's you and I, when we were kind of prepping for the podcast and our pre-call, which had me all energetic and motivated, I got to tell you, because we see eye to eye on a lot of this stuff. I think, we were talking, I was telling you about a champion program I like to do, which is in different departments, kind of put people who are, in customer support. There's a lot of people who are in customer support not because of lack of technical skills, but possibly because their CV matches customer support, but their potential is so much beyond customer support. Their potential.
Maybe I would say I wouldn't. What you just said implies that customer support isn't a great place to be, and I think there's some people whose people skills make customer support such an amazing fit.
No, not at all. I think a lot of times people wear a hat and they think, well, they put people in customer support in that category that you just said, oh, that's not a great place to be. I don't want to take someone from customer support and promote them to InfoSec. Not that that's not possible, but I'm rather thinking of, you take people who are very enthusiastic about technology, that really want to contribute and be more of an asset to the company, and you intertrain them, you intertwine them, you create different programs for them to excel, to be kind of your advocate within that department, so that when you're in an environment where you need all hands on deck, you've got your backup team, which is these great people that are loyal to the company, that love their jobs, that are able to champion security when you can't, because you're out there dealing with some real threats that could impact your organization. And meanwhile, you need someone to, and it's funny that I compare that to the National Guard versus the Army. So if you think of the Army deploys and goes overseas and takes the battle to the enemy, but the National Guard stays here to protect the border, to assist and kind of champion the mission. But a lot of the National Guard work isn't fighting. A lot of it is to support you when there's a flood, when there's an earthquake, when there's so much stuff. And that's how I kind of look at those champion programs. How do you see champion programs? Do you feel like those are effective, or?
I think it's an interesting way to look at it. I think there's an inherent value in building influence and support throughout the organization. So from that perspective of what you said, I think I'm in deep alignment with you. The part that I'm not sure if we agree about, or the part that I maybe differ on, is I actually want fewer people in the organization to have to think about security in net. If I do my job really well, then
they shouldn't feel security.
They shouldn't feel security?
Meaning there's security there, but it doesn't hinder their business.
Yes, exactly. Because the business-minded CISO's job is to optimize the organization.
Correct.
And often that means us solving the problem for everyone else as opposed to us asking other people to help us solve the problem. I relate this to IT. IT is awesome. It was a foundational part of me. I've led both organizations at 2 startups now. And when you think about IT, if you think about an IT help desk as an example, you walk up to the IT help desk, your computer has a problem, you want them to fix it, you hand them your computer, they fix the problem for you. If then instead you handed them the computer, they told you what problem you have, and they handed it back to you and told you to fix it, you would be furious because that doesn't make sense. And I think security teams are often in that mindset of being in the we find problems and tell the user what the problem is and tell the user to go fix it, as opposed to we find solutions so that the business moves faster. Ultimately, if you think about when a security team is ultra successful, it's when the organization feels little to no pain, but is very aware of the actual risk that's being mitigated. Because obviously there's a failure mode that some companies fall into, which is that they don't care, or it's not even that they don't care. Any company cares, but they don't resource it, or they don't know, or they don't pay attention, and so they can ignore the pain. But if you're aware of what it is and realize that you've built the right team to solve it for you, as opposed to a team that's just gonna pass that out to the rest of the organization, I think that's where, for me, the champion programs feel like we're kind of passing the problem out to the rest of the organization as opposed to solving it for them. The flip side of that is, like you said, influence-wise, I think it's critical that security looks at themselves as partners and influence builders and really educators throughout the organization. I don't think that every person in the company needs to know the same things.
Correct.
I think that you have this deep responsibility around evangelization. If you're not evangelizing what the security team does and helping the organization understand it, then in the same way as any other part of the business that doesn't talk about itself, people assume you don't do as much, or they assume you don't have as much of an impact. Now, that champion set can absolutely combat that because they work with you all the time, and so they can evangelize in their own words in their own organization, as opposed to it being a thing where the security team has to figure out the evangelization all themselves.
And I think a lot of that, and I agree with you. It's interesting. It's not that I'll say this. You're absolutely right, and I think on an organization where you're in an enterprise level and you've got a lot of resources, it's easier to make security fly under the water and not let people feel it, right? Sometimes the best security is the one that you don't see.
Sure.
Right? Like when I go to Israel, I feel super safe. You don't see security, but you know you're secure. I don't know why. It's that feeling in the air. I don't know what it is. It's just that way for me, right? And in smaller organizations or organizations where the CISOs lack resources, it's almost like you're always grasping at anything you can get your hand on to just increase that awareness. And I think that's the challenge a lot of CISOs have, is sometimes they're unable to really recognize the tools and the size of their organizations and really implement things based on organizational culture, resources, funding, and goals. Right? In different environments, businesses require different things. And one of the challenges CISOs have always had is recognizing what business am I in? What does my company really do? And then how do I become a business enabler and not a no person?
Sure. I think what you're describing resonates for me. I think one of the reasons it resonates for me is I see a failure mode in a lot of security people, not just people at the top job, but throughout security organizations, where they are so enmeshed in the details of what it means to do security of technology that they forget that everybody else isn't as enmeshed in those details. And so they lose that perspective, and they end up in a place where their real focus is constantly trying to force other people to understand the world the way they do, as opposed to recognizing that they need to go help other people, they need to go themselves understand the world and explain their context in terms of the rest of the people. Like if you tell the business, we have to fix this vulnerability, so what? Like, so what that there's a vulnerability right now? Like, why do we have to fix it? Oh, well, it puts us at risk. Well, what does that really mean? Like, what is actually going to happen to the company? Characterize it in the business term. Like, what's the dollar impact? What's the brand impact? What's the legal risk? What's the, what is going to happen? And what do we need to do? And what's the ROI associated with us fixing the problem? And that doesn't replace setting standards and policies at some point. There's some baseline threshold that you want to just say, we've locked in stone, we agree about this thing. But everything needs to come back to, why are we doing this? Well, we're doing this because the risk to the business and how it could cause the business to fail is really important.
I think that starts from the basic analyst in a SOC all the way to the CISO,
Sure.
right? Is culturally, as CISOs, the first conversation you need to have with your team is, we never say no. Like, it's always about, tell me what you want to do. We'll figure out a way for you to get it done.
I mean, I definitely agree. I think even in those moments where you need to slow something down or to pause something, the answer should be, hey, we can't allow X thing. Like, this is shipping with too many vulnerabilities. My team's at your disposal to fix that. Let's fix that, then we can go live. So it's like a way of saying, I'm in this with you. We are partners together, and I am putting up the resources to solve this, as opposed to throwing something over the wall for you to solve.
I think that's where we're starting to see, you were one of the smart CISOs who didn't walk the Moscone floor this year. I luckily had a press pass and not a CISO pass, so it was great. Everyone ignored me. Mm-hmm. So I was walking, I'm listening to people talk, and the only people that didn't ignore me were marketing people and PR people.
Sure.
They're like, do you want to interview us? I'm like, no.
Absolutely.
Politely, thank you very much. We're a CISO podcast. We're a voice of the CISOs. We're CISO Conversations. We love vendors. They're part of our ecosystem. We need them to be successful in security, but there's 700 other people out there that'll do that for us. I'm kind of focused on the practitioner side of it.
Sure.
And so one of the really interesting things that I saw this year, and some of the vendors that I've been really impressed with, is their absolute change to saying, we're taking security out of the security ballpark and moving it into the different solutions that we solve. So if we're dealing with DevOps, we're not building any more tools and dashboards outside of DevOps. We're bringing everything inside to their natural environment. If we're talking about engineering, if we're talking about UI or CX or anything like, we're trying to move our tools that way. That was, I think, the most encouraging thing for me to hear this week here. Was
I like that.
To hear cybersecurity vendors finally catch up to the point of, I don't need another dashboard. I don't need another shiny box. I don't need more data. I need what you're talking about from the very beginning. I will need security to be in the natural environment of my user where he doesn't even feel it, but it's there.
Yeah, I think it's this move in some ways from, you articulated it as another dashboard or more data. I think it's a move from even from like alerts and insights to auto healing. I think we need to move to a place where we're confident enough about the results or the decision making within the technology that I'm buying something that actually reduces the amount of work in the organization,
not increases it.
And if we are going to buy something that adds data, I think one of the key things that I want to do is democratize the access to that information. I don't think security has a lock on knowing how to interpret that. I think there's plenty of brilliant data scientists who can look at the patterns emergent in a variety of different data sets at the same time. And so the more we can figure out how to make those data sets transparent and available and empower other people to ask questions of that data that we might not think to ask because of our own biases and mindsets, the more likely we are to solve problems in an authentic and more complete way.
How do you do that?
I think one thing is just getting out of the core mindset that security is somehow very secretive and needs to be in this black box and
like
whatnot.
We're in that brown hallway.
Right. You don't want to be in the brown hallway. You want to be upstairs with the TVs that show all the stats on the screens. And you want to then, particularly, I think what you really want to do is start from the perspective of why can't we make this available to the rest of the company, as opposed to starting with why would we? It's like, why wouldn't we? If you shift that mindset to be like, why shouldn't someone in ops be able to see this dashboard or this data set or whatever else? And then you start asking yourself the question, and then you start inviting in those people and saying like, hey, like, they just get access. You have access to all this extra information. Like, we trust you as a result of, a variety of vetting and background checks. And frankly, like, you're part of this thing. We're doing this together. They will explore the information. Or you can, I mean, if you want to make it very tactical and practical, then maybe like during your company's hack week, you find people to explore it with. But the point I'm making is like starting from that perspective of like, instead of saying, oh, well, why would we make this public? There's risk in that. Instead say like, why wouldn't we make this public?
What's your thought on zero trust?
The networking, the idea
of
shifting
zero
from
trust.
Network boundaries to identity-oriented boundaries. That's what I really think about when I think about zero trust is like you're moving from a place where instead of relying heavily on a network boundary or relying heavily on a set of proofs of validity of identity, of which you might include things like usernames and passwords and 2FA and a device attestation and other things. But the idea is the atom or the firewall is dying as we push more and more into the cloud conceptually. And instead of rebelling against that and trying to do, like IP locking of your SaaS platforms, route all of those SaaS platforms and give access to both internal and external resources only to the users that you want to give access to. And ideally also only on the devices that you want them to access it from. So that way you're not relying on everyone being on VPN. And for me, the real beauty of the zero trust model is you're trying to actually marry high security with acceleration for the business. If you can go home and you don't have to sign into VPN, or actually let's forget home. Let's say you're on call. You're the CISO of a small organization. I'm not saying you particularly, but like if you're the CISO of a small organization, and you're on call because you're in the thick of it with your incident response team, if you have one, then you don't want to necessarily mean you literally have to like immediately, if you get paged, go somewhere, VPN in, spend the next 6 hours like at home, or even feel like you can't leave your house. What you really want is to be able to, as on the fly as possible, access the resources that you need, but safely, so that you can then help respond to the crisis, as opposed to being in a situation in which you have to be in a particular place to respond to the crisis.
So, I mean, I agree with you. I think there's this inherent VPN culture of everywhere you go, use a VPN. Now, I'm guilty of that myself because I don't connect to Wi-Fi. I have a VPN on my my phone, and everywhere I go, I use my VPN. And it's inherently difficult, but when you're traveling around, when you're going from place to place, you're constantly on the move. A lot of times it's very difficult not to use a VPN, especially if you're doing international travel, right? There becomes inherent risk with traveling to specific places around the world. And a lot of times our schedules, the things that we do are listed. People know them. It's just, it's there, it's in front of people. And I think that's a really kind of challenge. Kind of as we wrap up the interview, kind of one of the topics I really wanted to talk to you about was kind of like the growth of your bug bounty and pen testing. Like, I think those are very important topics because it's your basic blocking and tackling, it's your basic vulnerability management. How do you grow your internal bug bounty? How do you grow your external bug bounty? And how do you make it so that you're really not launching an app with multiple vulnerabilities, or you're not slowing down business deployment by having something developed that really does have a bunch of vulnerabilities and bugs in it that slow the business down?
Got it. So I think there's a bunch of questions there, and they're all really interesting to dig into. So I'll pick them off. Scaling your external bug bounty is a lot about a combination of proving ROI so the business funds it, and building really good relationships with the research community that you want to work with. So in the case of Dropbox, we invested from a really early point in leaning into the bug bounty. Also at my previous company at Zenefits, they invested very early into the bug bounty as being a core methodology of vulnerability discovery in their applications. And for them, two of the key features of those bug bounty programs is the relationships that they've built with researchers, which means those researchers are excited whenever we release something. They want to go find things. They want to go help us be successful because we've built that positive association with our brand for them, and authentically, right? We have to actually we have to actually pay bounties. We have to actually fix the things so that they feel like we care and are actually, their time isn't wasted. And so the like work to actually maintain those researcher relationships is really important. And then on the inside, like on the flip side, what you have to do internally is help people see, yes, we spend a lot of money on, say, bounties per year, and that is money well spent because it's actually less expensive than it would cost to get a tiny fraction of the same number of hours of pen testing from a major firm, because it finds more total vulnerability. The efficiency is super high. But the other question I think you asked is also really interesting, which is more, how do you enable the business to ship product more quickly with low vulnerability counts or with low risk?
Right.
And I think my biases here reflect my tech background, because my way of thinking about that problem, my way of conceptualizing that problem is very similar to the first question you asked. I want to solve things. So rather than me building a ton of systems to just find vulnerabilities and then tell developers that they need to go fix a thing, or my way of thinking about this is, how do I find a class of vulnerabilities, and security takes responsibility for building something that stamps out that whole class so that you're secure by default. Maybe an example of this would be turning on content safety or content security policy for everyone, and security maintaining the content security policy rather than someone else. And then you just not perfectly, but mostly stamped out cross-site scripting from your applications, or finding ways to build an interface for your databases so that so that SQL injection is no longer a thing that can happen. Or if someone you get to the point where you can say things very authoritatively, like if someone writes SQL code, it requires a special permission from security for it to actually get committed. And we've given people the easy path, the paved road for them to follow, so that if they want to go off-road, like they're doing so with special oversight and guidance from security. So if I think about how to make things ship faster, it's actually, how do I go solve a bunch of classes of problems so that security has to spend less time with product consulting or less time with engineering, helping them remediate issues, and more time thinking through the higher level business concern of what is the implication of building this product, how does it affect the world, how does it affect privacy, et cetera.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that. I think that's the security challenge of our age, right? How do we help and enable business to ship faster, safer, with less bugs, to ensure that we're in less headlines by security researchers who are sending us a tweet going, hey, we found this list of vulnerabilities, or you've got this misconfigured cloud server sitting somewhere, and you're going, okay, thank you, and let's pay you, and then here, sign an NDA.
I mean, that gets back to by the way, the thing you just said gets totally back to the researcher relationship thing. If you have a really positive relationship with the research community overall, then it's going to be much more likely that instead of someone going and putting it on their blog, Dropbox or whomever else is vulnerable to X thing, what they're going to do is come to you and say, please fix this. We want you to be successful. And or they're going to join your bug bounty program and just submit the bug, because you've given them a clear, easy to access and trustworthy path to get their data to us, for us to understand it and then compensate them for the work that they did, essentially for us.
And that's absolutely true. And I know we're out of time, and so I can have this conversation for another probably 2 hours and not get bored from it. But unfortunately, we live in a universe where we're in time constraints. And so, Justin, thank you so much for having us here at Dropbox and your insights. And I have like 5 other questions we didn't get to, but this conversation was so enlightening to hear your kind of view on that human element, which I think so many people need to hear, because so many people are quick to blame the finger on their users rather than looking at how to enable security as an underlying, and making sure that, hey, we don't need to hide in a cave, and we don't need security to be this big red thing on your screen that goes bam, 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 alert, you've clicked on a phishing email, but rather let it be somewhere where people can just focus on the job that they're hired to do, and let security keep the organization secure.
Sure. Thanks,
you so
Justin.
much
for having me.
Thank you for coming on the show. Thank you so much for having us. Beautiful office. We're in the Tupac room, by the way. So California Love signing out. This is our last interview of RSA. I'm so happy to be going back home to Atlanta. We're going to be bringing you, I miss home. I miss home. I
can empathize.
You know,
Sure.
And then I'm going to Israel. I'm like, it's just crazy. I'm just ready to go home. Until next year at RSA, and I hope to see Justin before RSA next year. But until next time, guys, thanks so much for listening. Thank you for having us.
Absolutely.
And we'll be back with so much more. Enjoy your weekend, folks.